Hi, welcome back to Movie Review Mom. Thanks so much for visiting my little channel here on YouTube. And I really appreciate it when you subscribe and especially when you leave comments down below. Well, no, especially when you subscribe, but I do like the comments too. I love it when we get good conversations going. All right, so I had a director send me a preview copy of a movie, and I'm really excited to talk about it. I love it when directors send me copies that I can watch in the comfort of my own home. So today, the movie I'm reviewing is called Prolonged Exposure. Now, the movie didn't have a rating associated with it, but I'm going to give it a PG. There's some more adult conversation that I'll tell you about. But in terms of profanity and violence and all that kind of stuff, I would give it a PG because you don't really see any gory, yucky stuff or anything like that. So it's an hour and 48 minutes. And the movie review mom grade I'm giving it is probably a B minus, somewhere around there. So I'm going to give you an overview and point out things I liked and didn't like, as well as tips for parents should you decide to watch this with your kids, and even point out some themes that you can talk about as a family, because there's some really interesting concepts and ideas in this movie. So first of all, in a nutshell, this is an indie drama and it's already won several awards from various film festivals. So that's always a really good sign. The writer and director is Travis Toms, and we've been emailing back and forth, and I wanted to share with you some of the things that he said about the movie when I asked him what inspired him to write it and what's it all about and what's the big takeaway and all that kind of stuff. And first he said, well, it's different from what most people expect. And that's true. There's a little bit of a mystery, crime, and a psychological look at trauma and pain and suffering and that kind of stuff, which is really interesting. Now, let me read you some more. He said, first of all, when I asked him what inspired him to write the movie, he said that his words, he says, my day job is mental health counseling, and the confidentiality of my profession has always intrigued me. While we're required to disclose to someone if our client is going to hurt themselves or someone else, what happens if we find out something horrible that doesn't fall within those exceptions? And that's part of the story of the movie. He says, what could we tell without violating professional ethics? I decided to start my script on that premise. As I refined the script, honing it to work within our very limited budget, it evolved into something I think a little deeper. And it is. There's several things going on. There's a mystery and a crime. And then there's this therapist who's meeting these people who are survivors from this horrific event. And things are kind of coming out in their discussions that he thinks, wait a minute, something's off here. Something else might be going on. And I think that's really intriguing. So again, the director continued and he said, the film seems to have a wild variation in the reactions it gets from audiences. Art film and film noir lovers often enjoy its throwback feel and all of the hidden film references, which is true. Psychology fans love the Freud jokes, which is true. People familiar with PTSD and grief can relate to the psychological arc of the film and often find it moving, and it is very touching. Some, whom I'm guessing haven't fully moved through their own pain, find the film trivializing in its approach to sexual and violent trauma. I thought that was interesting. And then he said, others find it to just be a slow moving mystery. And of those, there are people that dig the anxiety that builds up. And it is a very slow burn and it slowly builds. And you're like, what's going on? Others find it boring. And so if you don't appreciate those aspects of it, you're going to be waiting for something to happen. He says, there is a set of people who have told me that they've enjoyed seeing it the second time much more than the first, or come up to me to tell me about their favorite character. So that's always cool. Directors, actors, everybody in the film industry always loves that. And then there are those who saw it looking for an action film because that's how the distributor advertised it. Needless to say, they hated it. And I think that that's really interesting. The trailer that I'm showing here is the trailer that the director picked, and it features Dean Cain, and you can't tell exactly what's going on. But as I was searching online, I found another movie poster where it definitely looks like an action movie. So then when you watch the movie, which is not an action movie, you'd be like, what? This is terrible. It's not an action movie, because it's really not. It was filmed in 2 locations, and it's one of those adult talking movies. So you need to know that going in. And then finally, the director said, it's a complicated film, more so than I intended, but that's what it had to be. So I love the director's insights, and I'm so glad that he shared them with me, because it made me appreciate the film even more. Now, some quick tips for parents, and that is that kids will be bored because it's a talking movie. And then again, like I said, some parents might be as well, especially if you're expecting lots of action. There's discussion of a sexual assault a few times in the movie, but most of the therapy sessions revolve around a more violent attack at their workplace. And so that's what more of the discussion is about. There is a little bit of profanity, no F-bombs. It's pretty family friendly in that regard. Okay, so now some themes that are interesting and definitely worth talking about. They include fear, grief, sadness, pain, and all of those types of feelings associated with experiencing trauma. So PTSD is definitely an issue that's addressed in the movie. One of the characters, in fact, the main character, whose name is Murdoch Lane, and he's played very well by Addison Foskey, says, the longer we try to avoid things, the worse they get. So it's kind of a shout out for therapy, that if you experience a horrible event, and even really not a horrible event, but anything where you really need to talk about something, therapy is great. When I asked the director, Travis Toms, what messages or themes he hoped that audiences would take away from the movie, this is what he said. In his words, he said, I intended the film, as I said, to be a psychological mystery based on 70s film noir. I think on the surface, we achieved that. However, it became a film about healing, overcoming the wounds we all have inside, and the bittersweet and frightening journey that entails. And I love that aspect of the movie. It's not just some mystery or crime or something like that, which the movie definitely has both of those things, but it does take it to another level. And I love movies that have, like onions, lots of layers, and this one definitely does. Again, he says, it's hard to sum the takeaway of that in one phrase. I guess I want people to know that with good help and good friends, that journey is a little easier. And he definitely points out that it's not an easy journey trying to heal from whatever type of issue brought you into a therapist, whether it be sexual assault or this bombing in the case of this movie or whatnot, but that healing can happen, and it does take time. And I think it's interesting that the movie is a slow burn, and so is the healing process. And just like the title is called Prolonged Exposure, the slow burn of the movie is prolonged, and you're being exposed to this therapist predominantly, that it's a lengthy process. It's time consuming, and you take it one day and one moment at a time. And so I think in that regard, the movie really illustrates the slowness of that process. So if you're patient as you watch the movie, I think you'll really enjoy it. Now, some things that I really liked about the movie, first of all, include Dean Cain. So if you are a fan of his old TV series, Lois and Clark, or any of his other TV series or movies, then I think you'll really get a kick out of seeing him again. The director told me, quote, Dean Cain is one of the nicest people that I've met in the business and a truly stand-up guy for being willing to be in our film. And he said, due to time and money constraints, Dean Cain shot all of his scenes in one day. That's super impressive. And I love hearing that celebrities are actual nice people. I hate it when they portray really good people and then you find out they're really mean in real life. The movie, by the way, was entirely shot in just 14 days, which is also impressive. And in fact, all of the actors, except for Dean Cain, actually were locals from the Albuquerque area. So I love it when indie films really try to showcase the local talent so that you can really support an area, a city, or just simply their efforts for bringing a new project to light. The movie was actually made for less than $70,000. That's so impressive, especially when you think about how many millions of dollars are spent on these Hollywood blockbuster films. And sometimes I give them a B or a C or a D, sometimes even an F. And so for him to make a good movie with much less money is very impressive. Now, I also really like it when movies start and you still don't quite know what's happening. And the director does this really well. The camera slowly pans across various items in a room, and you're like, oh, should I be paying attention? Are these clues? And you hear people talking, and you're like, who are these people? What's going on? And then slowly you are introduced to these characters, and then more characters, of course, come after that. But I love the not knowing of it because that adds to the intrigue. And so the director did that really well as you slowly start being able to piece things together. There's also a little bit of humor, which I always appreciate, even in a drama, which this most definitely is. And the humor in this movie mostly manifests as sarcasm between two therapists. And as the director mentioned in his comments to me, mostly have to do with Freudian therapy. And you can imagine that kind of humor. Now, another thing that impressed me about the movie was the color palette. I love it when a director is very intentional, and you need to look at this essence as part of the film art because it's not a Hollywood blockbuster in full color. This is not a Marvel Avengers movie. This is really designed kind of as an homage to the 1960s, 1970s film noir movies and mysteries, I should say. And so the color palette features a very dusty, muted set of colors, and that really does take you back in time where you're not sure, is this present day or did this occur decades prior? And there's really no mention of that per se, but it definitely pays homage to those film styles. And so I appreciated that. But you'll have to get used to it. You don't try to fix the colors on your screen. That's how this movie is intended to look for a reason. Now, there's also a cast of characters, a number of personalities, and I love that the director just doesn't give it away at the beginning. Everybody says some things that makes you wonder, wait, is he a good guy or a bad guy? Or, good girl, bad girl? Is this person in on it? Or is this person truly as he or she is being represented? Again, I love the not knowing, and I love slowly being able to piece all that together. There are also some really fun Alfred Hitchcock visual references in the film. And so if you are a cinephile, you might appreciate some of those things. Now, it's really tricky to film an entire movie with only two locations, which this movie has. And I thought the director did a good job of it because it doesn't feel like just two, even though you're like in this guy's house. The therapist lives in his office. It's in a house. You see different parts of his house, and then you also see another building. And so there are different angles and enough that you are interested. It's not the same background and you're getting bored. At least I didn't think the movie suffered at all for that. And of course, that saves budget money for sure. When I asked the director what his directorial influences were, or in terms of, all of the directors out there, which ones really influenced him positively, especially in this movie. He mentioned Still of the Night by Robert Benton, and I thought, oh yeah, I could definitely sense that while watching the movie, so kudos for him. Now, there are a few things that I didn't particularly like, which is why I didn't give it an A plus. But there were, as you can see, plenty of good things that I did enjoy. First of all, a lot of the actors are fairly new, beginning their careers. And so some of the acting and the dialogue is a little stiff. Not in every scene, it kind of ebbs and flows. There are just a few moments where I was like, I probably would have done a retake on that one scene or pulled some more out of that particular actor or actress. But overall, especially for newbies, I thought that they did a good job. And they're not all brand new. They have been in other things as well. The pacing, as I mentioned, is extremely slow, but it is intentional. So again, just know that going in. And my biggest complaint about the pacing is the climax of the movie. And I felt like it should have been more frenetic, more chaotic, to contrast with that slow, measured pacing of the film. Not necessarily to point out this is the climax of the movie, but just to really break it up, to kind of disturb your senses. But it doesn't. It kind of is also very slow and measured. And then the actual moment happens so quickly, meaning it's here and gone very quickly. And then, it cuts to a new scene, and then it's back to the slow, measured pacing. I just didn't think it was as traumatic of a moment as it could have been. Anyway, and then finally, I would have loved to have learned more about prolonged exposure, since that's the title of the film. In fact, it actually is a therapy technique. It's legit. And some audience may not know that. So it would have been kind of interesting just to learn a few, little statistics, or talk about it a little bit more in the therapy sessions, show us a little bit more, show us how effective it is or not, and just teach us a little bit about that, just because that is the title of the movie. And I just always love it when I learn things from movies. And in fact, there even could have been in the closing credits, and if there were, I missed it, but something that said, if you'd like to learn more about prolonged therapy or prolonged exposure, go to this website or whatever. Anyway, that's it. So I hope you enjoyed this movie review. And if you watch this movie, I hope that you enjoy it as well. And by the way, go to my website, moviereviewmom.com, where you can read more about my review, as well as see the list of all of the places where this movie is streaming, where you can purchase it, rent it, and stream it online on your computer, on your TV, and whatnot. Anyway, thank you again. I will catch you in the next one. Bye for now.